I remember the taste of copper in my mouth, the way it coated my tongue and filled my sinuses until I could smell nothing else. That was the first thing. Before the pain truly began, before I understood what I had become, there was only that metallic flood rushing through every breath. They tell you that failure in the trials means death. They tell you this as children, gathered in the selection pits while gene witches probe your flesh and measure the span of your shoulders. Death, they say, is the mercy granted to those found wanting. They do not tell you about the other mercy, the slower one. My name was Corvin Drael. I was 14 years old when they took me from the ash wastes of Secundus Hive, and I held that name for 3 more years while they broke my body and rebuilt it wrong. Now I am something else. Now I am a number on a manifest, a unit of labor measured in output quotas and maintenance cycles. But somewhere beneath the scar tissue and the neural dampeners, Corvin Drael still whispers. He remembers everything. The fortress monastery rose from the granite peaks like a fist raised against the sky. I remember seeing it for the first time through the transport's viewport, my breath fogging the armor-glass while 60 other aspirants pressed close around me. We were the survivors of the first culling, the boys who had outlasted the desert marches and the drowning trials and the hunger boxes. We thought ourselves warriors already. We thought the hardest part was behind us. Brother Sergeant Kalos met us in the landing bay, his ceramite boots ringing against the deck plates as he walked the line of our huddled forms. He was the largest human being I had ever seen, though I would learn later that he was considered slight among his brothers. His armor was the gray of storm clouds, and his face was a ruin of scar tissue beneath eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. He looked at us the way a farmer looks at livestock before the slaughter, not with cruelty, but with a kind of professional detachment that was somehow worse. "You are nothing," he told us. His voice was deeper than any human voice should be, resonating in my chest like a second heartbeat. "You are meat that dreams of becoming something greater. Most of you will die. This is good. This is proper. The flesh that cannot transcend deserves only to be discarded." He paused at the end of the line, turning to face us all. "Those of you who survive will become gods among men. Those who fail will become useful in other ways." I did not understand what he meant. None of us did. We were children playing at being soldiers, drunk on propaganda and the desperate hope of escaping the lives we had known. In the hives, becoming a chosen aspirant was the greatest honor imaginable. Mothers wept with joy when their sons were taken. They did not weep for grief. They did not know what we would become. The first year was physical. They pushed us beyond every limit the human body was meant to endure, and then they pushed further still. We ran until our feet bled, until the bones cracked beneath our skin, and then we ran more. We fought each other with training blades until we could no longer stand, and then we fought on our knees. They fed us chemical slurries that burned in our stomachs and made our muscles twist into new configurations, and we screamed through the nights while our bodies tried to tear themselves apart. 17 boys died in the first month. I remember their names, though I wish I did not. K.L. Morvis was the first. His heart simply stopped during an endurance run, his enhanced metabolism overwhelming the organ before it could adapt. They left his body where it fell as a lesson to the rest of us. By the time the sun set, the fortress serfs had already dragged him away to whatever processing rendered aspirant corpses into useful material. I did not know then that I would one day count myself among those serfs. I did not know that I would learn exactly what they did with the bodies. The second year brought the surgeries. I remember lying on the cold metal table, staring up at lights so bright they burned even through my closed eyelids. The apothecaries worked in silence, their movements precise and mechanical as they opened my chest and began installing the first of the implanted organs. There was no anesthesia for aspirants. Pain, they told us, was a teacher. Pain would show us if our bodies were worthy. The first implant was the secondary heart. I felt them cutting through muscle and bone, felt them spreading my ribs apart with metal tools that clicked and whirred with mechanical indifference. When they placed the organ inside me, still wet with nutrient fluid from the culture vats, I felt it begin to beat against my original heart in a rhythm that was not quite synchronized. For 3 days afterward, I could feel the two hearts fighting for dominance, each trying to establish primacy over my circulatory system. The pain was exquisite. The pain was clarifying. They installed the os modula next, the gland that would begin hardening my bones. Then the biscopia, which would drive my muscles to grow beyond human limits. Then the hemastamen, the Larraman's organ, the catalepsian node. Each surgery pushed me closer to something greater than human, and each surgery pushed others over the edge into death. Torval Crest died when his body rejected the os modula. I watched the bones burst through his skin from the inside, jagged spurs of calcified growth erupting from his flesh like teeth breaking through gums. He screamed for 6 hours before his skull cracked from the pressure. The apothecaries made us watch. They made us memorize the sound of his voice as it became something inhuman, something that belonged to a dying animal, rather than a boy we had trained beside for 18 months. This is what happens to weak flesh, Brother Sergeant Kalos told us while Torval's body still twitched on the surgical table. This is the price of inadequacy. Remember it. Let it drive you to be stronger. I remember thinking that I would rather die than become what Torval had become. I remember being grateful when they dragged his corpse away to the processing chambers. I did not yet understand that death was not the only destination for failed aspirants. I did not understand that there were fates worse than the clean mercy of organ rejection. By the middle of the second year, our cohort of 60 had been reduced to 23. Those of us who remained had begun to change in visible ways, our muscles swelling beneath skin that seemed too tight, our bones growing denser and heavier with each passing week. I was taller than I had been when I arrived, broader in the shoulders, and my voice had dropped to a register that sometimes surprised me when I spoke. We were becoming something more than human. We were becoming weapons. The progenoid glands were the final implants, the sacred organs that carried the genetic legacy of the chapter. They installed the first one in my neck, just below my jaw, and the second in my chest cavity between my hearts. I remember the apothecary's voice as he worked, reciting prayers in a language I did not understand, while his hands moved with surgical precision inside my open flesh. These are the seeds of eternity, he told me when the surgery was complete. If you become a true brother, they will one day be harvested to create new aspirants. If you fail, they will be taken from you regardless. The chapter's legacy is more important than any individual vessel. I did not fully understand what he meant until later. Until the 13th trial, there were 20 of them altogether. The trials that would determine whether an aspirant had truly earned the right to become a battle brother. Each one tested a different aspect of our enhanced physiology, a different capacity that the implants were meant to provide. The first 12 were brutal but survivable tests of endurance, of pain tolerance, of combat capability, of mental fortitude. I passed them all, though not always easily. I watched 5 more of my brothers fall during those trials, their bodies or minds simply unable to meet the standards demanded of them. The 13th trial was different. They called it the dreaming, and they told us nothing about what it would involve. We were led into a chamber deep beneath the fortress monastery, so far below ground that the air itself felt heavier, thicker, laden with pressure that made my enhanced lungs work harder to extract sufficient oxygen. The walls were covered in runes that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly, their meanings hovering just at the edge of comprehension. There were 7 of us remaining from the original 60. 7 boys who had survived everything the chapter had thrown at us, who had been cut open and rebuilt and pushed beyond every human limit. We stood in a circle around a central altar, and on that altar rested a chalice filled with liquid that glowed faintly in the darkness. Brother Sergeant Kalos entered the chamber last, his armor removed for the first time since I had known him. In his bare flesh, I could see the full extent of what the transformation meant, muscles corded beneath skin that was almost gray with accumulated scar tissue. His body, a map of every wound he had ever sustained and healed through. He was beautiful in the way a weapon is beautiful, all function and terrible purpose. The gene seed carries memories, he said. His voice echoed strangely in the chamber, bouncing off walls that should not have been able to produce such acoustics. The blood of the Primarch flows through you now, and with it comes the weight of 10,000 years of war. The dreaming will show you visions of our chapter's history. It will show you the glories and the horrors that have shaped what we are. Some of you will see too much. Some of you will break. He lifted the chalice from the altar, and the liquid inside it swirled with colors that had no names. Drink, he commanded, and prove that your mind is worthy of the body we have given you. I was the fourth to drink. The liquid burned going down, hotter than anything I had ever consumed, and for a moment I thought I would simply combust from the inside. Then the visions began. I saw battles fought across worlds I had never heard of. Vast armies of ceramic-clad giants wading through seas of enemy dead. I saw void ships the size of cities exchanging fire across impossible distances, their weapons tearing holes in reality itself. I saw alien horrors that defied description, things with too many limbs and not enough substance, things that existed in angles that human eyes were not meant to perceive. I saw my brother aspirants beside me, their faces twisted in expressions of awe and terror as they witnessed the same visions, and I saw one of them fall to his knees, with blood pouring from his eyes. The dreaming pushed deeper into my mind, past the memories of the chapter and into something older, something that felt like the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. I felt the presence of the Primarch, a consciousness so vast that touching the edge of it was like staring into a sun. I felt his grief and his rage and his desperate, terrible love for the Imperium he had helped create. And I felt something else, something that should not have been there, a darkness at the edge of the vision, a hunger that watched and waited and wanted. I tried to pull back from it. I tried to close my mind against the intrusion. But the dreaming held me fast, and the darkness crept closer, and I felt it beginning to pour into the spaces between my thoughts. Then pain exploded through my skull, worse than anything the surgeries had inflicted, and I was on the floor screaming while blood ran from my nose and ears and the corners of my eyes. I could hear the others screaming too, and beneath our screams I could hear something else, a voice that was not a voice, a sound that was not a sound, a whisper that burrowed into my brain and refused to leave. When I woke, I was strapped to a medical table in a different part of the fortress. The lights above me were the same surgical brightness I remembered from the implantation procedures, and an apothecary was standing over me with instruments I did not recognize. "You failed," he said. His voice carried no emotion whatsoever, as flat and mechanical as a servitor's vocalization. "Your mind was not strong enough to contain the dreaming. The visions have damaged your psychic architecture beyond acceptable parameters." I tried to speak, tried to ask what that meant, but my jaw would not move properly. Something was wrong with the muscles of my face, something that made every attempted expression feel like pushing through mud. "The gene seed remains viable," the apothecary continued. "We will harvest it when you have been processed. The chapter's legacy will continue, even if you cannot carry it. That is the only value remaining in your flesh." He turned away from me, and I heard him speaking to someone else, his voice dropping to a register that I could barely perceive. "This one still has most of his cognitive function. Standard servitor conversion would be wasteful. Recommend assignment to the serf cohort with neural limiters to prevent the dreams from recurring." Another voice responded, one I did not recognize. "Agreed. Mark him for secondary processing. We need replacement labor in the Armory Maintenance Division." I did not understand what they meant. I did not understand what was about to happen to me. When the apothecary returned with a device that looked like a crown of needles, I thought perhaps they meant to kill me after all, that this was the clean death I had been promised, the mercy granted to those who failed the trials. The needles pierced my skull in 17 different places, and the last thing I felt before consciousness dissolved was a terrible, consuming sense of loss. They did not kill me. Death would have been too easy, too wasteful, too much of a mercy for flesh that still had utility remaining. Instead, they remade me. I woke in a different body, the same body, technically, but altered in ways that took me months to fully understand. The enhanced muscles were still there, the hardened bones, the secondary organs that pumped and filtered and sustained. But there were other things now too. Metal components fused to my spine and threaded through my nervous system. The neural limiters the apothecary had mentioned were not simple devices. They were complex machinery that interfaced directly with my brain, dampening certain neural pathways while enhancing others. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The visions from the dreaming were gone, the whispers that had burrowed into my thoughts excised with surgical precision. But other things were gone too: ambition, hope, the burning desire to become something greater that had driven me through 2 years of brutal training. In their place was a hollow space, an emptiness that felt like someone had scooped out a part of my soul and filled the cavity with static. The second thing I noticed was the collar. It was black metal, seamless, fitted so precisely around my neck that I could barely feel it against my skin. But I could feel what it did: a low hum of power that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeats, a constant reminder that I was no longer my own. When I tried to reach up and touch it, my hand simply refused to move. The neural limiters prevented any action that might interfere with my assigned function. An overseer found me in the processing bay where I had been deposited after the surgery. He was human, or had been once. His left arm was a mechanical replacement, his eyes augmented with targeting reticles that flickered red as he scanned my body. "New meat," he said, and his voice carried the particular weariness of someone who had delivered this speech many times before. "You were almost a space marine. Now you're something else. You belong to the chapter, but you'll never be part of it. You'll serve, and you'll work, and, if you're very lucky, you'll die before your mind starts to remember what you lost." He handed me a grey robe, identical to the ones worn by the dozens of figures I could see moving through the corridors beyond the bay. Serfs. Chapter serfs. The invisible workforce that maintained the fortress monastery, that cleaned the armor and prepared the ammunition and processed the bodies of aspirants who did not survive. "Your designation is 847 Kappa 3, the overseer told me. "Your previous name is no longer relevant. You will answer to your designation when called, and you will perform whatever tasks are assigned to you. Disobedience will result in neural correction. Repeated disobedience will result in servitor conversion. Do you understand?" I understood. The neural limiters made certain that I understood, dampening any emotional response that might have interfered with compliance. I felt the ghost of rage somewhere deep inside me, the memory of what it had felt like to want things for myself, but it was distant and muted, like hearing music through a thick wall. "Yes," I said. My voice was different now, flatter, emptier, stripped of the vitality that had once made it recognizably mine. "I understand." "Good." The overseer turned away, already dismissing me from his attention. "Report to Armory Section 12 for orientation. Your shift begins in 1 hour." I walked through the corridors of the fortress monastery, the same corridors I had run through as an aspirant, dreaming of the day I would stride through them in ceramite plate. Now I shuffled along the walls, my eyes downcast, my steps measured to avoid drawing attention. Other serfs passed me without acknowledgement, their faces as blank as I suspected mine had become. We were all ghosts here, remnants of failed potential pressed into shapes that served the chapter's needs. Armory Section 12 was deep in the fortress's mechanical bowels, a vast space filled with racks of weapons and ammunition and the constant grinding of machinery. The Battle Brothers never came here themselves. Such mundane concerns were beneath warriors who existed only for war. Instead, serfs like me performed the endless maintenance that kept the chapter functional, cleaning bolters and polishing ceramite and sorting the thousands of individual components that made up a Space Marine's war gear. My orientation was brief and brutal. A senior serf, his designation long since forgotten in favor of the title Primary Armorer, showed me how to disassemble and reassemble a bolter in the approved manner. His hands moved with the mechanical precision of long practice, and I noticed that 3 of his fingers had been replaced with augmetic digits, the result, I would later learn, of accidents that were common in the armory's more dangerous sections. You'll work 16-hour shifts, he told me, with 4 hours for sleep and 4 hours for nutrition and maintenance. The schedule never changes. The work never ends. If you fall behind quota, you'll be corrected. If you damage equipment, you'll be corrected. If you fail to show proper reverence when a battle brother passes, you'll be corrected. Do you understand? I understood. The neural limiters ensured that I understood. There's one other thing. The primary armorer's voice dropped, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes, the ghost of emotion, carefully suppressed but not entirely extinguished. You were almost one of them. I can see it in your build, in the way you move. The brothers can see it too. Some of them will treat you worse because of it. They see you as a reminder of weakness, of the possibility that the gene seed might fail. Don't expect mercy from them. Don't expect recognition. You are nothing to them now. Less than nothing. He was right. In the weeks that followed, I learned exactly how little I mattered to the warriors I had once dreamed of joining. Battle brothers passed through the armory to collect their weapons before deployment, and each time one of them looked at me, I saw the same expression, contempt mixed with something that might have been disgust. I was a reminder of failure, a walking monument to the limitations of the flesh they had transcended. My existence offended them on some fundamental level. One brother, a veteran sergeant whose name I never learned, made a habit of finding fault with every weapon I prepared for him. His bolter was never clean enough, his ammunition never sorted precisely enough, his grenades never organized according to the proper protocols. Each time he found fault, he reported me to the overseer, and each time the overseer's response was the same, a pulse from my collar that sent agony cascading through my neural pathways, leaving me twitching on the ground, while the other serfs carefully did not watch. The corrections were not designed to cause lasting damage. They were calibrated precisely to inflict maximum pain without reducing my capacity for labor. The neural limiters ensured that each pulse left me functional but reminded me, in the most visceral possible way, of my place in the hierarchy. I was a tool. Tools did not have feelings. Tools did not have complaints. Tools simply performed their function until they wore out, and then they were replaced. But the neural limiters were not perfect. Nothing was perfect. Not even the God Emperor's most sacred machinery. And in the spaces between correction cycles, in the quiet moments when my mind was allowed to rest, I began to remember. The dreams came first. Not the visions from the dreaming, those were gone forever, excised by the surgery that had unmade me. But other dreams, older dreams, memories of the boy I had been before the chapter claimed me. I dreamed of the ash wastes of my home world, of my mother's face as she wept with joy at my selection, of the friends I had left behind, who had probably died in the manufactorums or the mining pits, or the endless wars that consumed our world's population like fuel fed to a hungry fire. I dreamed of the boy called Corvin Drail, and in my dreams he was still whole, still hopeful, still burning with the certainty that he would become something greater than the suffering that had defined his existence. When I woke from these dreams, the neural limiters would pulse gently, dampening the emotional residue before it could interfere with my function. But something always remained, a tiny ember of self that refused to be entirely extinguished. The processing chambers were located 3 levels below the armory, accessible through a series of reinforced doors that required authorization I did not possess. I had never seen them, had never been assigned to work in them, but I knew they existed. Everyone knew. The bodies had to go somewhere. After all the failed aspirants, the serfs who wore out, the battle brothers whose remains could not be interred in the chapter's crypts, the fortress monastery consumed flesh as efficiently as it consumed ammunition and fuel, and the processing chambers were where that consumption was organized. I learned the truth about them during my 3rd month as a serf, when a failed aspirant from the newest cohort was brought through the armory on his way to secondary processing. He was conscious, they were always conscious, the neural modifications, ensuring that they remained aware throughout the procedure, and his eyes found mine as the overseers dragged him past my workstation. "Please," he whispered. His voice was barely audible above the grinding of the machinery, but I heard it clearly. My enhanced hearing, one of the few gifts from my transformation that remained undiminished, caught every trembling syllable. Please, help me. I don't want to. I don't want to become. A pulse from his collar cut off his words, and his body went rigid with pain. The overseers dragged him onward, and I watched them disappear through the reinforced doors, and I knew exactly what was about to happen to him. I knew because I had heard the sounds that emanated from those chambers during the quiet hours of the night cycle. Wet sounds, mechanical sounds, sounds that no longer seemed to come from anything recognizably human. The primary armorer found me standing at my workstation, my hands frozen over the bolter components I had been sorting, my eyes fixed on the doors through which the aspirant had vanished. "Don't think about it," he said. His voice was gentle in a way I had not expected, the harsh efficiency of his usual tone softened by something that might have been sympathy. "It's easier if you don't think about it. Focus on the work. Let the work fill the spaces where the thoughts want to grow." "What do they do to them?" I heard myself ask. The neural limiters should have prevented the question, should have dampened the curiosity that drove it, but something slipped through. Something always slipped through. The primary armorer was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They take what's useful and discard what isn't. The gene seed, first, that's the most valuable part, the legacy that must be preserved at any cost. Then the organs, the enhanced tissues, anything that can be repurposed. The rest." He paused, and I saw his augmetic fingers twitch against the workbench. "The rest becomes servitors, or nutrient paste, or raw material for the flesh forges. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is allowed to be wasted. The chapter's resources are too precious to squander, even on failed vessels." I thought about the meals I had eaten since becoming a serf, the grey protein slurry that sustained our bodies through the endless work cycles. I thought about the servitors I had seen throughout the fortress, their faces blank, their movements mechanical, their bodies grotesquely modified to perform specific functions. I thought about the boy who had just been dragged past me, whose eyes had been so full of desperate, hopeless pleading. The neural limiters pulsed, and I returned to my work. But the knowledge remained, buried beneath the dampening fields, waiting for the moments when the machinery's grip loosened. I knew now what I was. I knew what I had narrowly avoided becoming. And I knew that the distinction between my fate and the fate of the servitors was measured only in degrees, only in the specific ways our flesh had been deemed useful. Time passed differently in the armory. Without natural light, without the rhythm of day and night, the only markers were shift changes and maintenance cycles. I counted the weeks by the number of bolters I cleaned, the months by the campaigns the Battle Brothers departed for and returned from. My body adapted to the routine, my enhanced physiology, finding a new equilibrium that allowed me to function within the parameters assigned to me. But my mind refused to fully submit. The dreams continued, growing more vivid as time passed, and in the spaces between shifts, I began to notice things that I should not have been capable of noticing. Patterns in the machinery's operation, gaps in the surveillance coverage, moments when the overseer's attention was focused elsewhere. I did not plan to escape. The neural limiters made planning impossible, dampening any thought that strayed too far into the territory of resistance. But I began to observe, to catalogue, to build a mental map of the fortress monastery's routines and vulnerabilities. The ember of self that refused to die was learning, even if I could not consciously direct its education. It was during my 7th month, as a serf, that I discovered the logs. I had been assigned to clean a storage chamber in the armory's lower sections, a routine task that required no particular skill or attention. The chamber contained old equipment, weapons too damaged to repair, armor components too corroded to salvage, the accumulated detritus of centuries of warfare. Among the debris, I found a cogitator terminal that had been disconnected from the fortress's primary networks, but not completely deactivated. The neural limiters should have prevented me from accessing it. They should have registered my proximity to unauthorized equipment and triggered a correction cycle, but the terminal was so old, so forgotten, that it did not appear in the security protocols. It existed in a blind spot, a relic of an earlier era that the fortress's current systems did not recognize as a potential threat. I touched the activation rune, and the screen flickered to life. The logs were fragmentary, corrupted by decades of neglect, but enough remained to piece together a picture of the fortress's early years, records of the first aspirants, of the initial trials, of the experimental procedures that had been used to refine the chapter's recruitment process. And among those records, I found references to something called the Reflection Protocol. The Reflection Protocol had been developed during the chapter's founding, a method for evaluating aspirants who failed the mental trials but whose bodies remained viable for gene seed cultivation. The records described a procedure that would preserve an aspirant's consciousness within a servitor frame, allowing their enhanced flesh to continue producing genetic material while their mind was trapped in an endless loop of simulated existence. The protocol had been abandoned after 17 years, declared too costly and too unreliable for standard deployment. But the records indicated that some subjects remained active, their servitor forms still functioning somewhere within the fortress monastery, their consciousnesses still dreaming whatever nightmares the protocol imposed upon them. I stared at the screen, and the neural limiters pulsed, and I felt the knowledge settling into the spaces where hope used to live. This was what awaited me, not death, not oblivion, but an eternity of service in which some fragment of awareness would remain, trapped within machinery that would never stop, never rest, never allow the mercy of forgetting. The boy called Corvin Drail would become a ghost haunting his own flesh, watching through eyes he could not close as his body performed tasks he could not refuse. The terminal flickered and died, its power cell finally exhausted, and I was left alone in the darkness of the storage chamber with the weight of the future pressing down upon my enhanced spine. After that, the dreams changed. I no longer dreamed of my home world, of my mother's face, of the hopeful boy I had been. Instead, I dreamed of the servitors I had seen throughout the fortress, their blank faces, their mechanical movements, their absolute submission to the will of their masters. In my dreams, I was one of them, my consciousness trapped behind eyes that could not blink, my thoughts screaming into a void that no one would ever hear. I woke from these dreams with the neural limiters pulsing at their maximum capacity, struggling to contain the terror that surged through my modified nervous system. The overseer noticed the change in my behavior. How could he not? My quotas slipped, my movements became erratic, my responses to commands slightly delayed. He called me to his office during a rest cycle and studied me with his augmented eyes while I stood at attention, my body responding to training, even as my mind spiraled through calculations of doom. "You're degrading," he said. His voice carried no judgment, only clinical assessment. "The neural architecture is breaking down. It happens sometimes with aspirant conversions. The enhanced cognition fights against the dampening fields, creates feedback loops that accelerate deterioration." "What happens now?" I asked. The question should have been impossible, should have triggered an immediate correction, but the overseer only nodded as though he had expected it. "Normally, you'd be scheduled for secondary processing. Your cognitive capacity would be preserved through the reflection protocol while your body continued to serve." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, a flicker of that suppressed emotion I had glimpsed once before. "But there's another option, rarely used. Expensive. The chapter doesn't like to waste resources on failures, but sometimes a serf demonstrates value that justifies additional investment. Hope." The word surfaced from somewhere deep within me, a concept I had not felt in months, and the neural limiters surged in response. But the overseer raised a hand, and a signal from his augmetic arm dampened the collar's response. "The gene seed in your neck is maturing well," he continued. "Better than expected, actually. The apothecaries have been monitoring your biometrics, and they believe your progenoid glands may be particularly viable, suited for producing multiple rounds of successor seed rather than the standard single harvest. He leaned forward, his augmented eyes boring into mine. If you agree to voluntary extended cultivation, they'll leave your consciousness intact. You'll work in the Medicae facilities, tending to injured battle brothers and maintaining the gestation equipment. It's not freedom. Nothing is freedom in the Imperium. But it's better than the alternative. I stared at him, struggling to process the implications through the haze of the neural dampeners. They wanted to keep me alive, conscious, functional, not because they valued my mind, but because my flesh had proven unexpectedly productive. The gene seed growing in my neck was worth more than I was, and they would preserve the vessel that contained it for as long as it continued to produce. What do I have to do? I heard myself ask. The overseer smiled, and there was no warmth in it. You have to watch, he said. Every aspirant who fails, every serf who wears out, every piece of flesh that passes through processing, you'll be there. You'll help prepare them. You'll harvest what can be salvaged and dispose of what cannot. That's the price of continued consciousness. You survive by participating in the consumption of others. The neural limiters pulsed, and I felt the last fragments of the boy called Corvin Drail screaming somewhere in the depths of my modified brain. Yes, I said. My voice was flat, empty, the voice of something that had already died and simply hadn't stopped moving yet. I agree. I have worked in the Medicae facilities for 6 years now. Though time has long since lost its meaning, I have watched thousands of aspirants pass through these chambers, their bodies opened and emptied and repurposed according to the chapter's needs. I have harvested gene seed from the dying and the dead, my enhanced hands moving with surgical precision, while my mind retreats into the quiet spaces where the neural limiters cannot fully reach. The progenoid glands in my neck have been harvested twice already, each time producing multiple viable seeds that have been implanted in new generations of hopeful boys. The apothecaries tell me that my flesh is remarkably productive, that the modifications made to my body during the failed trials have created an optimal environment for gene seed cultivation. They speak of me as though I were equipment, and perhaps that is all I am now. Perhaps the boy called Corvin Drail died on that surgical table 7 years ago, and what remains is simply machinery that dreams it was once human. But the ember refuses to die. In the quiet moments, when the Medicae facilities are empty and the neural limiters have dampened to their baseline operation, I remember the taste of copper in my mouth, the first and last true sensation of my transformation. I remember the dreams of glory that sustained me through the trials, the certainty that I would become something greater than human. I remember the boy who believed that suffering would be rewarded, that faith and endurance would be enough. He was wrong. We were all wrong. The Imperium does not reward its servants, it consumes them, processing their flesh and their faith into fuel for an endless war that no one will ever win. The Space Marines are not gods. They are weapons, and weapons do not care about the hands that forge them. We failed aspirants are not even that much. We are the slag, the byproduct, the waste material that accumulates at the edges of the forging process. But we remember, in the depths of our modified brains, behind the neural limiters and the dampening fields and the careful surgery that was meant to unmake us, we remember what we were. We remember what we dreamed of becoming, and we remember what was done to us, the violations of flesh and mind that transformed hopeful children into living tools. I write this confession not because I expect rescue, not because I believe anyone will read it, but because the act of remembering is the last form of resistance available to me. The neural limiters prevent me from acting against the chapter, prevent me from escaping or fighting or even dying on my own terms, but they cannot prevent me from thinking, from recording, from preserving some fragment of truth in a universe designed to grind truth into dust. Tomorrow, a new cohort of aspirants will arrive at the Fortress Monastery, 60 boys, culled from the selection pits of worlds throughout the chapter's domain, each one burning with the same hope that burned in me before the trials extinguished it. They will run and fight and suffer, and most of them will die, and the survivors will be cut open and rebuilt into something greater than human. And some of them will fail. Some of them will reach the dreaming and find their minds too weak to contain it, will wake strapped to surgical tables while apothecaries discuss their disposition in the flat tones of inventory management. Some of them will become servitors, their consciousness trapped in machinery that never stops. Some of them will become serfs, their bodies pressed into shapes that serve the chapter's needs while their souls slowly starve in the darkness. And one of them, perhaps, will find themselves standing where I stand now in the Medicaid facilities, watching the processing that they have been made complicit in, remembering the boys they used to be while their hands perform the work that sustains the chapter's eternal hunger. To that aspirant, if they ever read these words, I offer this: you are not alone. You are not the first to fail, and you will not be the last. The system that broke you has broken thousands before, and it will break thousands more, and nothing you do can change that. But you can remember, you can hold onto the ember of self that the neural limiters cannot quite extinguish, and you can let it warm you in the cold spaces between shifts. That is not hope. Hope died when the dreaming broke me. But it is something. It is the only thing left. My name was Corvin Drayle. I was 14 years old when they took me from the ash wastes, and I held that name for 3 years while they broke my body and rebuilt it wrong. Now I am Serf Designate 847 Kappa 3, and I will carry this number until my flesh is no longer productive, until the gene seed in my neck has been harvested for the final time, until they finally process me into whatever form serves the chapter's needs. But somewhere beneath the scar tissue and the neural dampeners, the boy called Corvin Drayle still whispers. He remembers everything, and he will never, ever stop.